Welcome to the Empowered Birth Series, where I go deep into everything that you need to know to plan a true, empowered, natural birth. And today I'm going to share with you the 3 things that you need to be watching out for when you're hiring your midwife, either for a home birth or a birth center, so that you don't get bait and switched, screwed over, and tricked into a hospital birth situation or getting otherwise talked into an induction. You see, not all midwives are created equal. And I went into this very briefly in the 26 things that you need to know if this is your first time planning a true natural birth. Go back and watch that video if you'd like the full list, or you can go to my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies, and just get the quick overview in PDF form. So this is number 2 on the list of 26 things that you need to know. And it's the one I discovered the hard way with my first pregnancy. You see, at the beginning, I was just looking to have a home birth. And I thought, logically, you just hire a midwife and then you get a home birth. Now, that wasn't exactly the case. I also thought that midwives were completely natural minded and that I wouldn't get talked into any unnecessary interventions, tests, exams, or anything that would derail my home birth. And again, I was wrong. This then led to me having a completely traumatic hospital birth. I managed to have a natural birth. However, I wasn't where I wanted to be. And I had PTSD from the pushing part of it because I was very well aware that the OBs outside my door were going to pull rank on my midwife and push a C-section if I didn't get that baby out right away. Now, it wasn't until after this experience that I discovered a new term, midwife. And that's really what this video is all about. It's about showing you the difference between a midwife and a midwife and why it matters. Because typically what happens is that moms go in, they say, I'm going to hire a midwife. And then they find out that this midwife is more medical minded. They're pushing induction, even natural induction methods, or otherwise saying if you don't go into labor by X days, then you're going to risk out of our practice. You won't be able to have a home birth. You won't be able to birth at the birth center. And we're going to have to switch your care to an OB. This can be incredibly stressful at the end of your pregnancy. And that's exactly why I'm going to show you how to avoid that scenario, so you don't accidentally hire a midwife when you are looking to have a true natural birth. Because midwives do not do true natural birth. They do intervention heavy birth. Typically, midwives are also nurses who got into midwifery, or they're otherwise more medical minded. And therefore, it can be really a form of betrayal when you encounter one. Personally, myself, I feel that midwife, because it means with woman, that you should be getting what you're paying for. And these midwives who are taking the title of with woman and then doing everything against woman, it's just not okay with me. So I'm calling it out. So before I get started, though, I'm just going to remind you that if you want to go deeper than what's in this video, I do have my book, Your Empowered Birth, which is available on Amazon. You can also read the story of how I got tricked out of my first birth and put into the hospital when I was planning a home birth. That's in chapter 3. And then how I reclaimed my power in chapter 4. So this is a culmination of what I learned when I was shopping for a midwife the second time, because I was not going to be tricked again. I was thinking to myself, there is no way in hell that I'm ever going to birth in the hospital. It was too stressful. I'm not going to get tricked, and I need to be even more careful who I hire, because now I realized that I was tricked out of my birth by a midwife, someone who was more medical minded and was deferring to the OBs. Now, I don't really know if she was doing this on purpose, and I don't even know if maybe her hands were tied, because the way that the system works is oftentimes it's an OB's playground and the midwives are playing in it, but they have been so phased out of maternity care, especially here in North America, where there was a whole campaign that vilified the midwives. If you want to know more about the campaign and the witch hunts that midwives have undergone and how the US and Canada got so messy and what's also going on with the UK, then I suggest you check out this book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage by Rachel Reed. In this book, she really goes deep into how the maternity care system is basically structured and how it got to the point where it's no longer wise women who are tending mothers, but instead they're still following the same medical model that is derailing true natural birth, which is also physiological birth. You might also want to check out my video that I did before this one, which is on how to hire your care provider, the 3 things that you really want to be paying attention to, because this kind of builds off of that. And furthermore, if you really want to go deep, you can also get my ebook, How to Hire Your Care Provider, which goes into what you really need to understand about midwives and even doctors, and how to choose the best person for you. Because again, not all midwives are created equal, as you're going to find out in a minute. Okay, so now that we've got the basics under the way, I just want to let you know that there are red flags with midwives too. And if you don't know what they are, then you're going to want to go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies and get the 17 red flags that tell you that your care provider is not supportive of true natural birth. Now, before you even start hunting for a midwife, you need to be clear that what you are planning is a true natural birth. So you're going to want to have your birth plan already ironed out and figure out exactly what you want, which is basically a hands-off birth. The empowered birth method is all about aiming for true natural birth and then pulling back only as needed. So I'm going to tell this to you in the form of a story of how I basically came to hire my midwife practice, because there were 4 practices that I applied to and only 3 answered. So before you get started, you need to be very clear on your birth plan. Have your vision ironed out. If you need help with that, you can always check out some of my other videos on how to plan your true natural birth. Make sure you're staying out of the natural birth traps. And once you have the idea of what physiological birth looks like, then you go in and you apply to all of the practices. So before you even get started on any of the other things that you need to do in hiring a midwife, you need to be very clear on what you're looking for. Are you looking to be in a birth center? Are you looking to have a home birth? Because those are 2 different things. And if you're not clear on where you're really going to go, then you're not going to really have a good map on what to expect. So do your due diligence. If you're choosing a birth center, then you're going to want to interview past clients, and you're also going to want to ask doulas in the area if that birth center is truly supportive of true natural birth, because some of them are really just glorified clinics that then still push a lot of interventions, and you get risked out, and then you get put in the hospital anyway, and it's a whole big mess. So you want to be very clear that not all birth centers are created equal, just like not all midwives are created equal. The second thing you need to be clear on is if you are planning a home birth, where else are you possibly going to give birth? So things happen, or maybe you even change your mind. You need to know what the backup hospitals are in your area just in case. And you also need to be clear on what your midwife's role would be if you went to that hospital. Once you know where you're going to be giving birth, and once you know what your birth plan is, then it's time to start shopping. And that leads to tip number 1. Apply to every single midwife practice that seems to align with what you're looking for. Now, I did this with my second baby because I knew right off the bat that I needed to find all of the midwives out there and discern whether or not they were going to support my kind of birth or if they were going to screw me over again. And so I knew also that trying to get a midwife can be really tricky because they're not always accessible. So the thing that you really want to know is, first of all, apply to every single midwife practice and put in the intake forms, get it all done, line up the appointments. You can sift through them after. So The reason why I'm saying this is that if you are waiting until the last minute to try to find a midwife, or you are already a couple of weeks into your pregnancy and you're not sure where to go, the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be, the more the practices are going to fill up. Midwives are really in demand, and there's not enough supply for that demand. Mostly because the medical system has a monopoly on birth. The hospitals really don't want midwives to be taking their business. I mean, it doesn't make sense to them. They want to keep telling moms that it's too dangerous to have a home birth, because if every mom started having a home birth, well, then they would be back at square one, where back in, I'd say, the 1920s, they had pushed all these moms into the hospital over decades to convince them that they had to birth in the hospital, because this wasn't automatically done. Women used to birth at home. It used to be normal. So the idea of going somewhere else for birth seems like as weird as it is today for people to stay home and not go to the hospital. And they'd be like, why? Are you sick? No? Then why would you go to the hospital to birth when you can just birth at home? And then, of course, the medical system also said, well, it'll be pain-free and you don't need to have any more pain. And because they had been basically vilifying the midwives and saying that they were uneducated, and there was a whole big witch hunt, reclaiming childbirth as a rite of passage goes into this at a greater detail. You can also kind of see it in Call the Midwife, where they were slowly starting to push women into the maternity care hospital instead of having the babies at home. And by about the 1960s, 1970s, most babies were born in the hospital. And it's only been in the last few decades that we've really started to push back against that because of the trauma that we've experienced. And we're wanting to stay home, but the midwives aren't there because they were phased out. There was an intentional witch hunt that phased them out. So there aren't enough colleges to train them. There's not enough certifications. And a lot of the midwives that were practicing before everything became legalized and certified, they went underground and they don't call themselves midwives. So if you want one of those, it's going to be even trickier to find, but they do exist. And I'm not going to name names, but I do know that there are underground midwives. And personally, I would probably go with one of them over somebody in the medical system for my own comfort after seeing what's been going on. So if you want to have a true natural birth, this is why I teach the empowered birth method of aiming for a true natural birth, being confident enough to do it yourself, because what ended up happening at the end of my pregnancy, even with my midwife completely supportive, is I had to wait until the very last minute to call her, because otherwise she was going to have to assess my progress. And if I was still slowing down in labor, then she would have had to legally transfer my care, because that's what the health authority was really expecting her to do. And she'd get in trouble if she didn't. You can again read that story inside of your empowered birth. And basically, what I'm telling you is the things that the medical system probably doesn't want you to know, because it will derail their monopoly. Oops. Anyway, so you apply to every single midwife practice in the area, and then you go for the appointments. And when you're going for those appointments, this is when number 2 comes in, tip number 2, which is that you're going to be looking at 3 key areas. Number 1, how do they handle tests and exams and your decision to not do them? Number 2, what is the environment like? Like when you step in, is it more clinical? Is it more like a medical office? Or is it more home-like? A truly holistic practice is going to be more home-like, with maybe a bookshelf and toys and a library. And a midwife office is typically going to be more clinical. So you want to be aware of the atmosphere. Does it feel like it's a home-like, welcoming environment? And the third thing you want to watch out for is what other affiliations do they have? So typically, if you are going with a more holistic practice, They may have a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or an herbalist or a nutritionist, somebody either that they refer you to and they have brochures out, or they're even on site. And the reason you want to look out for this is because if your midwife is just automatically referring you back to a doctor for every other non-pregnancy related complaint, then they are more medical minded. And they are more likely at the end of your pregnancy, if something comes up, to refer you to an obstetrician to then persuade you to have an induction. Now, this isn't always the case. However, it is very helpful to kind of see the atmosphere. You get the feel of the place. You pay attention to how they handle the tests and exams. Again, are they really open-minded? Are they willing to just leave you to it? Or are they going to just assume that those tests have to be done in order for you to comply with whatever their regulations are? So when I was going into all of these different midwife practices, I was watching out for this. And I'm just going to share a quick tip. When you bring in your birth plan to your midwife at the beginning of your pregnancy, at your first appointment, you are going to be saying to them, I plan to decline, insert test or exam or whatever you don't want to do. How are you going to support me in that? So I did this in every single one of my appointments, and I had 3 lined up over the course of 1 week. And I walked in and I said, I am declining every single blood test. And I paid attention to what the midwives would say back. Now, one practice was trying to tell me that, it's actually really not a good idea for you to decline all these blood tests, and we really recommend that you do them again. I know that you think that you don't have to do them again, but things can change. And I'm like, thank you, next. Because that was a hard line in the sand for me. Until I felt that I needed it, I was not going to do that. I knew that it was going to just cause me a lot of anxiety. I don't like needles. I'm not able to handle that kind of stress. And I had a toddler to take care of. And I was also taking care of my niece and nephew. So trying to schedule blood tests and prenatal appointments at the same time, it just didn't work for me. So I just decided to decline. And I also was very firm on my determinations, like I'm having a home birth. And one practice was like, well, we'll see. I mean, things can come up. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like, I'm having a home birth. Like, you really do not understand my conviction here. You're not tricking me again. I'm going to have a home birth with you there or not. And there's no way that you're going to talk me out of that. So this wasn't the right practice for me. The third practice, however, and I talk about this inside my ebook, How to Hire Your Care Provider. I also talk a little bit inside Your Empowered Birth as well. The third practice was just right. I was walking in and I was greeted by the receptionist, and she was sitting in what looked like almost a living room because there were couches and there were shelves of books and there were toys, and it really did look like a nice little setup for a home. And then when I saw the midwife and I went into her office, instead of sitting on one of those medical tables, I instead was sitting on a couch. Again, it was a nice little sectional. So there was space to lay down, and at the same time, it was really comfortable. And she just sat on the other side of the couch and she was talking to me, and I'm sitting opposite her. So there's no desk or anything like that. And we're just having a conversation. And she was actually not my midwife. She was just kind of interviewing for me because my midwife was coming back from maternity leave and she would be joining shortly. Anyway, she sits there, she looks over my birth plan, and she just starts to light up. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is the kind of births we love to support. We love hands-off birth. We love it when you want to have a completely physiological birth. Absolutely, you can do all of this. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, this practice is perfect because they're going to follow my lead. So you want to be paying attention. It's like, How do they respond to your birth plan? Are they responding by lighting up, or are they finding all these problems with it? Because if they're finding all the problems with it, they're not a right fit. You don't have time to sit there and convince them at a first appointment that you deserve to have that. Instead, just keep looking, because you don't hire that practice, even if it feels like a good vibe. You go and you interview every single one of them, and then you make a decision at the end. Now, when I hit number 3, I already knew like this is my practice, and it was the last one on the list. So I'm like, out of all the practices that I've been to, this one is the best. So this is the one I'm going to go with. I was also being assigned my own midwife, and having that one-to-one care with somebody that I would see continuously was really important to me. In fact, continuous care can actually benefit you and help you feel more confident in having your natural birth. You're also less likely to feel any anxiety because it's the same person every time. And not only that, they really get to know you. You're not just a number. So I really love the continuous care model. And this practice, automatically, they did that. And this then led into number 3, which is, how do they view birth? So I already got my answer when I was going to these 3 practices. I understood that the first practice was highly medicalized, and they viewed birth as like just a little bit more natural than what the rest of the medical system saw it as. But they were still into all of those tests and all of those interventions. They were really kind of iffy about me as well, because of the fact that I had just walked in and I'm like, I'm not going to weigh myself. I'm not going to pee in the cup. And I'm most definitely not going to be having any of these tests. Like, I have absolutely no desire to have any blood tests taken in my first trimester. I'm just going to enjoy my pregnancy this time. The first time I had been a nervous wreck. Second time, no, I was not, because I just knew that I had this. I knew what I was doing. And even now, if I was to get pregnant again right now, I would not do any tests. I would just follow my body. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have to do tests, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do tests. I'm saying that for me, this is what felt right. I do sometimes have a Write Your Empowered Birth Plan workbook. It's typically available either inside of my Empowered Birth Toolkit, or you can get it anytime if you go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/academy. This is my paid version of my services. So basically, you go in and you buy my course. And with that course comes all of the resources that I've accumulated. I keep putting things in. It's like a database of information. And the only thing that you don't get with your Empowered Birth Academy is live classes and live interaction, because that is an added service based on the fact that I don't work with everyone. I'm very protective of my time. And when I was doing the live classes and the live coaching, I recognized that I was really going to burn myself out if I continued down that route. And when I raised my prices, I didn't want to leave anyone behind. So you can get the free path, which is the Empowered Birth Toolkit, which if you sign up for that, you go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit. You get the birth advocacy report, which is very helpful because it allows you to basically see where your midwife might have limitations and what fears might come up, what concerns they might have. You'll understand that psychology a little bit better, and then you can find a way to help them. Because the midwives that truly got into birth because they love physiological birth and they want to see more of that, often their hands are tied. Often they're really frustrated by what's going on in the medical system, but they can't speak up. And this is something that I learned when I was working with midwives, not only as a client, but also as a member of the Fraser Valley Birth Network, where I was in connection with the local midwives and doulas and nurses, and they would tell me stories about how the obstetricians would go over their heads at the hospital and push their clients into repeat C-sections, and the gaslighting that would happen, and the limitations that they had, the restrictions, the difficulties that they had in being able to have clients in the first place because they weren't getting paid what they were worth, the difficulties in getting certification, the fact that they had to keep recertifying, and the fact that like the money and the funding just wasn't there for midwife services. So because of this, the midwives are really, really burning out at an alarming rate. And you really need to understand their limitations. If they are in a group practice, even if they have other midwives on rotation, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be available for your home birth. Now, there are ways around that. So check out some of my other videos about how to get around that obstacle. But the thing that you really need to understand is that if your midwife is on call, they are so tired. Like they are burning themselves out just trying to take on the clients, and they have to take on more than what they can reasonably handle because, first of all, they don't want to leave anybody behind. And second, they need to do it for survival because of how very little they get paid in comparison to a doctor, which personally I don't think is fair. I think that midwives should be paid either equally or even more than a doctor because of the fact that midwives are the guardians of physiological birth. They're the ones that are going to stay for a longer labor, whereas opposed to a doctor that comes in maybe in the last 30 minutes to deliver the baby. And in the meantime, they have nurses basically just updating them on where their clients are at in labor. And then they're saying, oh, just push Pitocin or just break their waters. And like that's how they operate. Sometimes literally, that's how they operate. They're like, well, it's time for a C-section. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a C-section, and then I'm going to do another C-section. I'm going to get paid for all these C-sections. I mean, there are Category 5 care providers out there. Go check out my birth advocacy report to really understand what Category 5s are, or watch one of my other videos where I talk about Category 5 care providers to really understand this. But they come in and they automatically just want to do a C-section because it gives them more money. And the more C-sections that they do means that they're seeing more clients, which means that they are still rolling in it compared to the midwives that are staying with somebody much longer, but they're not getting the recognition. So when you understand those limitations, you also need to recognize when you are interviewing your midwife, you want to ask certain questions, and they may not be able to tell you the full answer. However, you can usually kind of tell by asking about what they're really allowed to do. So if you say something like, so what happens if I go past 40 weeks? What happens if I go past 42 weeks? Is there anything that you think might come up in terms of the medical system or the licensing boards or anything where I might need to sign a waiver so that you don't have liability for my choice to decline XYZ? Because what you really want to be aware of is that if your midwife doesn't do something that's protocol, they can actually get into a lot more trouble than if a doctor kind of fudged on it. The reason for this, again, is because of the way that the medical system is, the way our culture is, and the fact that midwives have kind of been in a witch hunt situation where they take one wrong step and suddenly they're just being attacked. So unlike the situation where if something of a complication happens with a doctor and they just are like, oh, well, you know, things happen. If it happens with a midwife, that can mean they lose their license. That can even mean jail time in some cases. So they're dealing with a different dynamic. And again, you'll want to check out the birth advocacy report. Go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit. If you have any questions on this, you can also message me. You can hit reply to any one of my emails if you've already signed up for the newsletter, or you can reach out to me at hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. Okay, so to recap, when you're looking for a midwife, you're going to want to do these 3 things. Number 1, apply to every single practice in the area. Make sure you're also asking doulas and local moms who have had home births who they used in case there's one of those midwife practices that isn't well known. And then once you found them all and you put in your name for those intake forms and you get the appointment, the next thing you're going to want to do is pay attention to the atmosphere and the overall feel of the place, and recognize that not all midwives are going to support true natural birth. Not all midwives are going to like it if you say you're going to decline XYZ protocol test, because then that goes against policy. And you need to recognize that some are just midwives in disguise because they're nurses and they practice more of a hospital mindset. They don't really do home birth. And the few home births that they do are usually very hands-on. And they're more likely to push you right back into the hospital for the slightest thing. Like your waters could be broken for a number of hours, and suddenly they're like, oh, we have to transfer to the hospital. Nothing's really wrong. You feel fine. But now they're starting to freak out and they're pushing you into intervention. And finally, the third thing that you need to understand is, of course, about their limitations. You need to recognize what is the overall atmosphere of your health authority. Does your midwife have to answer to anyone? If your midwife has people that they have to answer to when it comes to how they practice, that informs their practice. So if they happen to be under an obstetric practice that is really pulling all of the strings, then they may be limited to what they can actually tell you, and they may have to push you through to the medical side of things. If they happen to be working out of a birth center that's also very heavily restricted, then again, that is going to inform their practice. If they happen to have an insurance coverage that only allows them to practice a certain way, even if they have skills outside of that, such as breech skills, it can still cause problems. So you really need to know what their limitations are, and then you have to see how willing they are to bend the rules for you, which you will find out more about how to do that if you get the birth advocacy report. Again, just go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit. And that pretty much wraps up how to choose your midwife. If you really want to go deep, though, I do suggest you watch the video on how to choose your care provider if you haven't already done that. And definitely check out some of the other videos on my channel. Again, if you have any questions, you can always put it in the comments. I do read those, but I don't answer them all right away. So if you really want to get a hold of me, all you need to do is email me hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, and I'd be happy to support you further, point you in the direction of another resource, or even give you some secret tips that I've picked up over the years of working as both a birth advocate, a virtual doula. And, I hear things. I hear things in the midwife community. I hear things in the doula community. I'm kind of a fly on the wall in a lot of mom groups. So I pay attention to what's going on, and then I bring you the information, because I believe that information should be free, it should be accessible, it should be available to you. And the only thing I really charge for is more access to me. So even with your Empowered Birth Academy, the reason why I charge for that is more because if you have any questions on any of the content, you can do an email back and forth exchange with me. You're going to have more access to that. And you also get access to one-to-one call for anything that you really have trouble with. And again, that kind of takes up my time. So the reason why I do that is, again, so that you can still have the access to me without me burning myself out. Because when I do take one-to-one clients, that's a hefty price tag to be able to have real estate in my brain, because I tend to work with clients anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, sometimes even a year. And I don't work with everyone. They usually have to be highly qualified clients that can also afford to pay me what I'm worth. and that they're going to do the work. So this is why I have my 3 paths, which again, it's do it yourself is path number 1, which you've already kind of gotten onto that track by watching this video. You can continue to watch these videos, and all I ask is that if you're going to do the do-it-yourself path, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Share this with other moms who could use it, and let's get this information out there. And if you're more of a self-study type, then I invite you to go check out Your Empowered Birth Academy. You go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/academy, and then you can get the entire course. If you do go through it and you love it, I would also really appreciate feedback because I'm constantly looking for case stories and testimonials. And I would love to be able to showcase your empowered birth. So you don't even have to be a full client to become an empowered mom. And once you are an empowered mom, you're an empowered mom for life, and no one can take your power away from you again. So that is what I have for you today. As I said, if you did find value with this, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and tell all your friends. Put this out in the mom groups. Get this out there. Anyone asking what they need to do to hire a midwife, I've just given it to you. And I'll see you in the next video where I'm going to be sharing about the things that you need to know to avoid getting tricked out of your home birth specifically, which is number 3 on the 26 things that you need to know to plan a true natural birth. And again, if you want that full list to know what videos are coming up next, then all you have to do is go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies or watch the deep dive video training that I did at the beginning of this series, telling you about those 26 things and giving you a little bit of an overview so you'll have a teaser. All right, thank you again for watching. Happy empowered birth journey, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.